When you buy a home, there are specific rights that pertain to you and your purchase. The Real Estate Settlement and Procedures Act was written to protect you. With all the questions and potential pitfalls these days, you might find you need a buyer representation, a buyer's agent that works solely for you. We'll talk with a buyer's agent and an attorney that concentrates on RESPA here on Your Real Estate Advisor right after a check of today's headlines.
Now, live with the ins and the outs and the do's and the don'ts of Texas real estate, this is Your Real Estate Advisor. Brought to you by Bankers Financial Group.
Welcome to the show. I'm Chet Wilke, your real estate advisor. You know, nearly 250,000 homes will be changing hands in Texas this year. The majority, hundreds of thousands of people, buy those homes by dealing with a builder's agent, a seller's listing agent, or directly from an owner. Many home buyers aren't aware there's another option, a buyer's agent. That's someone who's hired specifically to represent the home buyer in the transaction. How come so few of us really know what a buyer agent does? What exactly are their benefits? Plus, the Real Estate Settlement and Procedures Act, RESPA, has been around for many years, but a lot of buyers aren't aware of it and don't realize it can be a very useful negotiating tool when buying a home. Today, you'll get the scoop from real estate attorney Jerry Prager and from Curtis Hall, an accredited buyer's representative. Call us with your questions at our toll-free number, 1-877-977-8926, or email us at txcn.com by clicking on Your Real Estate Advisor. I want you to call in early, and we'll get to you as soon as we can. That number again is 1-877-977-8926. We'll be glad to answer your buyer representation or RESPA questions or any other questions pertaining to Texas real estate. Okay, let's get started. I wanted to introduce and welcome to the show Jerry Prager, an attorney for the Greater Dallas Association of Realtors, and Curtis Hall, a Hall of Fame member of the Real Estate Buyers Agent Council. Welcome, Jerry, and welcome, Curtis, to the show.
Thank you.
Appreciate having you on board.
Thank you, Chet. It's a pleasure to be here.
Curtis, you and I have something in common. We have a lapel pin here. It's an ABR designation. Tell us about ABR and what that stands for.
The ABR stands for an Accredited Buyer's Representative. That's a national designation put forth by the National Association of Realtors. Currently, there are about 30,000 accredited buyer's representatives across the country, and the designation is rapidly expanding into Canada, Brazil, South America, South Africa. It is the benchmark for the buyer representatives.
Jerry, there must be a million agents in the United States or less. What do you think?
I'm sorry, there may be what?
There must be about 1 million agents in the United States, or more or less?
I think the National Association of Realtors has close to 750,000 members, and I'm sure there's a lot of brokers who are not members, so I would think there's in excess of 1 million licensees in the United States.
So here we have 30,000 people that are ABR designees with 750,000 licensed agents. Mm-hmm. Boy, that's not a lot of folks out there to help with those buyers, is there?
No, it really isn't. But again, the ABR designation has become the benchmark, and it demonstrates both an accreditation, experiential, as well as educational requirements to earn the designation.
And so what does a buyer's agent do for the buyer himself?
Boy, that's a loaded question, Chet. I would say in a nutshell, to promote, to protect the best interests of the purchaser, as well as to do anything and everything possible to keep the buyer out of harm's way.
Out of harm's way. Well, Jerry, you're a real estate attorney, and you practice that quite a bit in the Dallas area. Has there been much in the way of litigation in reference to buyers' rights being trampled on by various people across the area?
I would not characterize it as a great deal of litigation. There are cases that come up occasionally, and there's claims that are being made occasionally. But under our current scheme of things, and we've had such a strong market in the last 4 or 5 years, there have been a decrease actually in claims and in lawsuits involving real estate licensees, and usually the claims that we're seeing currently involve post-closing defects where the seller failed to disclose some defect in the property, and the buyer did not discover it with his own inspector, and then asserts a claim after closing.
So what's your opinion of buyer agency? Is that something that's going to be around for a while? Is that something we should be very thoughtful of using?
I think buyer agency is here to stay, and certainly it levels the playing field, and it allows the consumer, the buying, consuming public, to have representation and have his or her own advocate to protect his and her rights, as Curtis mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Well, Curtis, we know that buyer agents do a lot of things, but what do they cost? And everything costs something. There's always a cost to everything. Is there any cost related to having a buyer representation for a buyer?
Generally speaking, there are no additional costs over any other transaction. The buyer's representative's fee as a service provider will receive payment, and typically speaking, that is paid by the listing broker who is offering part of the compensation in the transaction to the agent that brings the buyer to the table. And generally speaking, that's via a buyer's representative.
So it's part of the deal, so to speak, huh?
You're paying for representation. Would you
One way
rather
or the
have
other.
your own? Yes.
One way or the other. When you buy a house, it's built into the price in some fashion. Whether you have a buyer representative or not, that's, I guess, up to the individual person.
Very much so. But I think there are possibly some additional costs with what I would say a true champion of the buyer. You're going to have an independent inspection. Your buyer's representative will be adamant about that. You may have some environmental inspections, and those things might be a little bit additional cost that a typical agent may not be so adamant about recommending the buyer get.
Well, most of the time, if they have a real estate agent in the transaction, whether it's a buyer's agent or not, inspections do occur, because there's an option period in the Texas real estate contracts that gives a buyer plenty of time to get the inspection process down. So maybe it's not an extra expense per se, because it would be something that someone would do normally. Don't you think, Jerry? Most everybody does inspections in their agreements of some sort.
Yeah, I don't think the settlement costs increase when buyer representation or buyer brokerage is involved, because regardless of the agency relationship of the real estate licensees, mm-hmm. Most buyers are sophisticated enough to know that they need the home inspected. There may be suggestions by a buyer's agent to have additional inspections for radon or other environmental matters that usually those represent pretty remote risks, and it will be up to a buyer to decide whether to incur those additional expenses or not.
Any thoughts about buyer representation agreements? I know there's one in place. We have one in Texas. Mm-hmm. Any experience in utilizing that agreement with buyers, and how do you explain that process to a buyer?
I think it's a counseling session, a buyer's initial interview between the buyer and the agent that they're interviewing to help them purchase a home. And I think that agent needs to demonstrate true value-added service delivery to the consumer. And through that, there'll be a trust that will build, and then just formalize that relationship mm-hmm. in an employment agreement. And
what if you have a buyer that says, well, that sounds great, I understand it, but I really don't want to bind myself and sign anything. You know, sometimes mm-hmm. that happens.
Sure.
Jerry, in Texas, we have an intermediary relationship availability in our agency scenario. And what happens if a buyer says he doesn't want to sign a buyer representation agreement? Where does he stand legally?
Well, that happens frequently because there is a great deal of resistance on the part of buyers to sign a buyer representation agreement. They feel they're obligating themselves to one licensee, and usually a lot of agents feel that they can establish a good rapport with the buyer, and certainly an oral agency relationship with that buyer can be established, but the broker involved in the transaction is not permitted to act as an intermediary unless you have written consent of both seller and buyer authorizing the broker to act as an intermediary. So without a written buyer representation agreement, the broker would have to give up that option.
So it would behoove the buyer to decide one way or the other, I guess, as they're getting into the transaction.
Yeah, because the house of the buyer's dreams might be listed by the broker, and mm-hmm. In fact may deprive that buyer of putting in an offer on that particular home without a buyer representation agreement.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit with Jerry about RESPA and how that works. Be right back. Welcome back to Your Real Estate Advisor on TXCN. I'm Chet Wilke, and I've got Jerry and Curtis with me today. And I believe we've got a caller on the line that wants to ask a question about buyer representation or something else about real estate. Hello, this is Chet Wilke. How can we help you?
Hello.
Hi, how you doing today?
Hi, just fine.
And what's your name?
My name is Michelle.
Hi, Michelle. I'm Chet. Can I help you out, or maybe I can have Curtis or Jerry answer a question for you?
Sure. I live in San Antonio, Texas, and we just bought a 4-year-old home, and we lived in it for 4 months. Come to find out, we have 90% of the house infested with mold, and we had to evacuate. We are having lots of problems as far as the insurance company complying with us. They've had a catastrophe team in there, tore the house to pieces. It's been raining. There's puddles of water on the floor. It's a big mess, and it's going on a year, and nothing